It was a cold, stormy night, and Emily was home alone. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of her old, creaky house. The power had gone out hours ago, and the only light came from the flickering candles she had scattered around the living room. Emily tried to focus on her book, but the constant groaning of the house and the eerie shadows dancing on the walls made it impossible. She decided to make herself a cup of tea to calm her nerves. As she walked into the kitchen, she felt a sudden chill, as if someone had opened a window, but all the windows were shut tight. She brushed off the feeling and boiled some water. While waiting for the tea, she heard a faint whisper, almost like someone calling her name. Emily! The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She spun around, but there was no one there. She took her tea and hurried back to the living room, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. As she settled back into her chair, she heard the whisper again, louder this time. Emily! It seemed to be coming from the hallway. Gripping her tea tightly, she stood up and slowly walked towards the hallway. The whispering continued, growing more insistent. Emily! Come here! Heart pounding, she reached the hallway and saw that the door to the basement was slightly ajar. She never went down there. It was filled with old furniture and dusty boxes, remnants of the previous owners. Summoning all her courage, Emily pushed the door open and peered down the dark staircase. The whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. She took a deep breath and started down the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. As she reached the bottom, she fumbled for the light switch, but it didn't work. The basement was pitch black. She took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The narrow beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of old boxes and cobweb-covered furniture. Then she saw it. In the far corner of the basement, there was a mirror. It was tall and ornate with an intricately carved frame. But what caught her attention was her reflection. She was standing still, but her reflection was moving, beckoning her closer. Terrified, Emily tried to turn and run, but her feet wouldn't move. It was as if she were rooted to the spot. The reflection continued to beckon, and she felt an invisible force pulling her towards the mirror. Closer and closer she was drawn, until she was standing right in front of it. The reflection's eyes seemed to glow with an eerie light. Suddenly, it reached out of the mirror and grabbed her wrist. Emily screamed, but no sound came out. She felt herself being pulled into the mirror, her body merging with the glass. Everything went black. When Emily opened her eyes, she was in a dimly lit room. It looked like her basement, but everything was reversed like a mirror image. She turned around and saw the mirror behind her. On the other side, in her living room, stood her reflection, smiling wickedly. She realized with horror that she was trapped in the mirror, and her reflection had taken her place in the real world. Emily banged on the glass, but no one could hear her. She was a prisoner, doomed to watch as her doppelganger lived her life. And the whispering started again. Emily, come here. Emily's heart pounded as she realized the gravity of her situation. Her fists beat against the cold, unyielding surface of the mirror, but it was useless. She was trapped, a silent observer in a twisted version of her own home. Her doppelganger, meanwhile, moved around the living room, examining everything with a sinister satisfaction. Days turned into weeks. Emily watched helplessly as her double lived her life. Her friends noticed subtle changes. Emily was more distant. Her laughter seemed hollow, her eyes colder. But they dismissed it as stress or fatigue. Only Emily knew the truth, screaming silently from the other side of the mirror. One night, the power went out again, plunging the house into darkness. Emily's reflection stood in front of the mirror, staring directly at her. For the first time since their roles had reversed, the doppelganger spoke. "Do you understand now?" It hissed. "This was my prison for centuries. Now it's your turn." Emily's mind raced. She had to find a way out. She started exploring the mirrored version of her basement. Everything was eerily familiar yet unnervingly different. She noticed that the boxes and furniture seemed older, as if time moved differently here. In one corner, she found an ancient book bound in cracked leather. The title was in a language she didn't recognize, but the illustrations showed mirrors and shadowy figures. Desperation fueled her as she flipped through the pages, hoping to find something, anything that could help. One illustration caught her eye. It depicted a mirror with runes etched around the frame and a figure stepping through it. Emily tore through the basement, searching for something to carve with. She found an old, rusty knife and hurried back to the mirror. Her hands trembled as she began to carve the runes into the frame, copying them exactly from the book. With each mark, she felt a surge of energy, as if the mirror itself was reacting. The final rune completed, the mirror began to glow with a strange, pulsating light. Emily's reflection noticed and rushed toward the mirror, but it was too late. The glass began to ripple like water, and Emily felt herself being pulled toward it. She braced herself and stepped forward, feeling resistance at first, then a sudden release. She tumbled out into her living room, gasping for breath. The power flickered back on, and she saw her doppelganger trapped on the other side, pounding on the glass with a look of pure rage. Emily didn't waste a second. She grabbed the rusty knife and slashed at the mirror, shattering it into countless pieces. The doppelganger's scream echoed through the house, then faded into silence. For a moment, Emily just stood there, catching her breath and staring at the broken shards. She was free, but she would never forget the horror of being trapped in that dark, mirrored world. From that day on, she kept a close eye on all the mirrors in her house. And whenever she heard a whisper in the night, she knew it was her doppelganger, still trapped in the darkness, waiting for another chance to escape. And so, she lived, always watching, always wary, knowing that the barrier between worlds was thin and could be breached again. Emily's life began to return to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a horrifying ordeal. She replaced the shattered mirror with a new one, less ornate and less sinister. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every creak of the house, every flicker of light, made her heart race with fear. Months passed, and Emily's vigilance became a habit. She covered the mirrors at night and avoided looking into them for too long. But the whispers never truly went away. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but they were there, lurking at the edge of her consciousness. One night, as Emily was preparing for bed, she heard a soft knock at her door. She froze, heart pounding. Who could be visiting at this hour? She cautiously approached the door and peeked through the peephole. To her relief, it was her best friend, Sarah. "Sarah, what are you doing here so late?" Emily asked, opening the door. Sarah stepped inside, looking concerned. "I needed to talk to you. I've been having strange dreams. In them, you're trapped in a dark place, calling for help." Emily's blood ran cold. She hadn't told anyone about her experience. "It's just a dream, Sarah," she said, trying to sound reassuring. "No, Emily, it's more than that. I feel like something's wrong. Something's trying to get to you." Emily's resolve wavered. She explained everything to Sarah, from the doppelganger to the mirror. Sarah listened intently, her face growing more serious with each detail. "We need to find a way to protect you," Sarah said. "There has to be something in that old book you found." The two of them ventured back into the basement. Emily retrieved the ancient book, its pages now more familiar, but still filled with mysterious symbols. They pored over it, searching for clues. Sarah pointed to a page with a detailed drawing of a protective circle. "This might help. It says here that this circle can shield against dark forces." They gathered the necessary materials and carefully drew the circle in the center of Emily's living room. Candles were placed at specific points, and Emily stood in the middle while Sarah recited the incantation from the book. At first, nothing happened, but as Sarah continued chanting, a low hum filled the room. The candles flickered, and the air grew thick with tension. Emily felt a presence, something dark and angry, pushing against the protective barrier. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the hallway. They both turned to see the new mirror shaking violently on the wall. Cracks began to form, spreading like spiderwebs across the surface. "Keep chanting," Emily shouted. Sarah's voice grew louder, more forceful. The mirror's shaking intensified until it shattered, pieces flying across the room. In the reflection of each shard, Emily saw her doppelganger, its eyes filled with rage and desperation. The hum grew louder, reaching a deafening pitch. Emily covered her ears, feeling the pressure build until, with a final burst of energy, the shards dissolved into dust. The room fell silent. Sarah lowered her hands, breathing heavily. Did it work? Emily looked around, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. I think so. I don't feel the presence anymore. They cleaned up the remnants of the mirror and reinforced the protective circle. Emily knew she had to remain vigilant, but for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. As the days turned into weeks, the whispers faded, and Emily began to reclaim her life. She still covered her mirrors at night, and the protective circle remained in place, a constant reminder of the darkness she had faced. But deep down, Emily knew the barrier between worlds was fragile. She would always be cautious, always watching, ready to protect herself from the shadow lurking just beyond the glass. And though the whispers had ceased, she could never forget the feeling of being watched, the eerie sensation that something was still out there, waiting for another chance to break through. As time passed, Emily settled into a cautious but calmer routine. The protective circle seemed to be working, and her life began to resemble something close to normal. Yet, the fear never fully dissipated. It lurked in the corners of her mind, a constant, subtle reminder of what she had endured. One evening, months after the second confrontation with the mirror, Emily received a call from Sarah. "Emily, I need to see you," Sarah said, her voice urgent. Emily agreed, and within the hour, Sarah was at her door, clutching an old, dusty book. "I found this at an antique store," Sarah said, her eyes wide. "I think it might be connected to what you went through." The book was ancient, its cover adorned with unfamiliar symbols similar to those in Emily's basement book. They sat down and began to flip through its pages. It spoke of mirrors as gateways, detailing rituals to both open and close these portals. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a passage. "It talks about a watcher, a guardian meant to protect the realm from those who try to cross over." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Do you think that's what was trying to get me?" Sarah nodded. "It makes sense. Maybe there's a way to summon this watcher to keep you safe." They decided to perform the ritual that very night. According to the book, they needed a reflective surface, so they used a small, handheld mirror. They drew another protective circle, this one specifically meant to summon the watcher. With the mirror placed in the center, Sarah began to chant the incantation. The air grew heavy, and the candles flickered wildly. Emily watched in apprehension as the mirror's surface began to ripple like liquid. A figure began to emerge from the mirror, slowly taking shape. It was tall and cloaked, its face obscured by a hood. The room filled with an intense energy, almost suffocating in its power. The watcher stood before them, silent and imposing. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Are you here to protect me?" The watcher nodded slowly. It raised a hand and pointed towards the broken shards of the previous mirror, now carefully stored in a box. With a wave of its hand, the shards lifted into the air, reassembling themselves into the form of the old ornate mirror. But this time, the glass was opaque and unreflective. "The barrier is stronger now," the watcher said in a deep, resonant voice. "But the threat remains. You must always be vigilant." Emily nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "Thank you." The watcher vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the opaque mirror behind. Sarah and Emily stood in silence, absorbing what had just happened. Over the next few weeks, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The watcher's presence, though unseen, was a constant reassurance. The whispers were gone, and the house felt lighter, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. But one night, as Emily was drifting off to sleep, she heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A whisper. "Emily." Her eyes snapped open, and she sat up, straining to hear. The house was silent, but the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. She got up and walked to the living room, where the opaque mirror stood. Its surface was smooth and unbroken, but something was different. She reached out, touching the glass. It was cold, unnaturally so. Her reflection was faint, almost ghostly. She felt a chill run down her spine. The watcher had warned her to be vigilant, but she hadn't expected the threat to resurface so soon. Determined, Emily retrieved the ancient book and began studying it in earnest. She and Sarah worked together, preparing for whatever might come next. They reinforced the protective circles, learned new incantations, and stayed alert for any signs of the doppelganger's return. Emily knew the battle was far from over. The barrier between worlds was fragile, and the darkness was patient. But she was no longer alone. With Sarah by her side and the watcher guarding her, she felt ready to face whatever came next. And as she stood before the opaque mirror, she made a silent vow. She would never let the darkness win. She would remain vigilant, always watching, always prepared, for as long as it took to keep the shadows at bay. Years passed, and Emily's life settled into a new kind of normal. The protective circles were maintained meticulously, the ancient books kept close, and the watcher's presence, though unseen, was always felt. She and Sarah grew older, their bond strengthening as they faced the lingering darkness together. Emily continued her studies of the old books, uncovering more about the nature of the mirrors and the entities connected to them. She learned of others who had faced similar threats and of the rituals and protections they had used to keep the darkness at bay. She became an expert in the arcane arts, driven by her need to ensure the safety of her home. One night, as she was poring over an especially cryptic passage, a sudden sense of dread washed over her. She looked up, heart pounding, and saw the faintest flicker in the opaque mirror. The glass, which had remained unreflective for years, now seemed to shimmer with an eerie light. "Sarah," Emily called, her voice trembling. Sarah rushed into the room, her eyes widening at the sight of the mirror. "It's happening again, isn't it?" Emily nodded, her fear returning with a vengeance. "I think we need to do something more permanent this time." The two women went back to the ancient books, searching for a way to seal the mirror once and for all. They found a passage that spoke of a final ritual, one that could banish the darkness forever but required a great sacrifice. Emily's heart sank as she read the details. "It says here that one of us must become the watcher, bound to the mirror for eternity to ensure the gateway remains sealed." Sarah's face paled. "Emily, no. There has to be another way." Emily shook her head. "We've tried everything else. This is the only way to make sure the darkness never breaks through again." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "But you can't just give up your life like this." Emily took Sarah's hands in hers, squeezing them tightly. "I have to. I've spent years learning how to protect this house, this world. If anyone is prepared for this, it's me." Sarah reluctantly agreed, and they began to prepare for the final ritual. The room was filled with candles, and the protective circle was drawn with even greater care. Emily stood in the center, the ancient book in her hands, while Sarah chanted the incantation. As the ritual progressed, Emily felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She looked at the mirror, seeing her reflection grow clearer and more defined. The watcher appeared beside her, its hooded figure solemn. "You are ready," the watcher said. "Your sacrifice will ensure the safety of many." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of her decision. She stepped closer to the mirror, the glass rippling as if welcoming her. With one last look at Sarah, she smiled, trying to convey all the love and gratitude she felt. "Goodbye, Sarah. Thank you for everything." And with that, she stepped into the mirror, feeling the strange, cold sensation of the glass enveloping her. The world around her shifted, and she found herself in a dark, reflective realm, the mirror world that had once imprisoned her. But this time she was not a prisoner. She was the watcher, the guardian of the gateway. She felt a surge of power, the knowledge and strength of all who had come before her flooding her mind. Sarah watched as Emily disappeared, the mirror returning to its opaque state. She felt a profound sense of loss, but also a deep respect for her friend's bravery. She knew Emily was now the protector, ensuring that the darkness would never break through again. Years turned into decades, and Sarah grew old, always keeping the mirror safe, always remembering Emily's sacrifice. She passed on the knowledge to a new generation, ensuring that the protective rituals were maintained, and the legacy of the Watcher continued. And in the mirror world, Emily stood vigilant, her eyes ever watchful. The whispers of the darkness were faint, powerless against her presence. She was the guardian, the protector, ensuring that the barrier between worlds remained strong. The darkness had been banished, but the story of Emily and the Watcher became a legend, a tale of bravery and sacrifice that would be told for generations. And through it all, the mirror stood silent, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit and the power of love and friendship to conquer even the darkest of threats.